Well, sir, if you can go ahead and give us your name and where you was born and raised.
Well, I'm Merwin Hans. I was born in Iowa, I was raised in Iowa, and then I got married and moved away.
What age? When did you get married?
I was in my 20s. My wife was a school teacher. She just passed away this last year, and it's been tough. But no, she was a nutritionist,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're in the process of setting up at the university out in Iowa a endowment fund for her,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got, I think we'll come out probably close to $1 million
Wow.
in for that. This should kick off grants,
Right.
probably for two or three people. We're targeting on, not on beginners, but people that are headed for PhDs,
Okay.
and which is where there's probably a lot of, it's a tough thing financially and intellectually to go through a regimen like that that's 7 or 8 years long.
Well, see, now you've come a long ways, because you recall yesterday we were talking about when you was a kid in the Depression
Oh yeah.
and how that affected, your life in the long run. Tell us a little bit about that as far as growing up in the Depression and the appreciation for things.
Well, I was lucky. I was in a family that there were just 2 children in the family. My dad had a retail meat establishment, and he made a variety of German bolognas and sausages, that kind of thing. He knew that inside and out, and so that was my background. I knew he was busy doing what he was doing,
Right.
but he also made it quite clear that he didn't want me to particularly get into that business.
Yeah, right.
And so I headed in a different direction. I don't think I would have been a good butcher anyway.
What direction did you want to go?
Well, at what point in time?
As a young man?
Well, I went off to college. I was interested in history, and I had intended to be a history major. But I looked around at realistically what the work opportunities were for history majors, and they weren't worth a damn. And those that were working in the profession weren't getting paid anything. So I moved over a notch, and I did a graduate degree, 2 graduate degrees, I guess, and in public management, that kind of thing. And I oversaw Department of Labor programs in about six states, and it's just the way that the federal government does their administration.
Now, when did you actually go to college? Was that before the war or after the war?
Before the war.
Okay.
My first military experience was much before that. When I was in early high school, there was a program that was called the Citizens Military Training something or other, and kids, you could enroll in that for 2 weeks. And I went to that, and it was the first time I ever fired a .30-06. It almost rolled me down the hill.
And how old was you then?
Well, I probably was 16 or 17.
Okay.
And this were all, what this was, as I saw it later, this was there were all these guys in college that were taking military training. And we were just the fodder for them.
Right.
And they needed to have so many weeks of work with troops, and we were the troops.
Okay.
And it was a lot of fun. That was my first experience up close to what military life was like.
Where was that at?
One year we were in Fort Dodge in Iowa. One year we were in South Dakota. You would go into what it was a matter of availability actually, but you were there. It was interesting because this is probably the first time most of these kids had ever been away from home.
Right.
And so it was not only a training experience for shave-tail second lieutenants, it was, kids, they were the soldiers. And it wasn't too many years after that, they probably were carrying a gun with live ammunition too.
So where were you at on December 7th, Pearl Harbor?
I was in college, and I remember that when that information started coming over the radio, I don't think we had television then. Well, everybody knew that it was big time, and I would have been about a sophomore in college at that point, and I remember, without any parental permission or anything else, several of us got on the train and went to Des Moines to the recruiting station, and we signed up, and they said, we can't really, we're overwhelmed now, we can't handle, but you go on back to school and we'll call you when it's time. So I was in school another year.
Okay.
Before I finally got called up.
And how old were you when you got called up?
I think probably about 20. 19 or 20.
Okay.
And
Where'd you go to get enlisted then, and where did you go through training?
well, this was once I signed up on this program, you were they would take you in for several weeks every summer, and you went out and played soldier, and I don't know how in the hell I got in the Navy. I'd never seen salt water before. But the Navy recruiters came by, and it just kind of appealed to me. I figured that if I'm going to get into real fighting action, I'd rather do it with a lot of people, and then it's you're all in or you're all out, one or the other.
Right.
You're not just one at a time.
Right.
And that's really we signed up in that way, and I trained at it 2 different summers, and they just put us out. I remember one summer I went on a tanker just for the pleasure of it, and scared to death. I don't know if you're acquainted with a tanker where you got high in the front and high in the back.
Right.
And in between there's just a catwalk, and there's a chain, and you tie yourself to that, and it's got to be a pretty calm day that you don't get washed over by a wave.
And where are you doing that at?
Well, I was working, I did a lot of this out of Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
And so I was intent. I knew that the way things were going, even as inexperienced as I was, I knew that this was going to be a long pull, and I would much prefer to have gold bars on my shoulder than.
Right. What kind of training did you go through, as far as basic training or then officer type training?
I did all the basic training, and then at various times we did different facets in preparation for it. I had a 12-week period at Columbia University that the Navy had taken over one of those dormitories there and was training people that were just brand new.
And what was they steering you towards? What was your...
That nobody told us that where we were headed, but it became obvious a little bit later. We were the bunch of people that were recruiting for the Normandy invasion.
What was the actual coursework during that 12-week period?
Well, you did a lot of things that was just for understanding, but you had what was amounted to, full college course of advanced algebra, and you had to go out and chart and do all the stuff that a person does, that if they're responsible for navigation. Then finally they said, well, now you're never going to use any of this, because this is where we go. We've got machines that do all that for you. So. And for a moment you were pissed off, but
Right.
you understood that it probably was a good idea that you knew the basics of it.
Yeah, you gotta have the principles.
Yeah, I never was in a situation in the Navy where I really needed that. I had somebody else who did it when I was on board ship.
So when you're out of schooling and stuff, what's your rank? Let's say when you went over to England, what was your rank, and when?
Ensign.
Okay. And when did you go over?
Well, what year was the invasion? 44, 44?
44.
Yeah,
44.
Yeah, I went to England in 43. I made every bar in London practically.
And what was your drink of choice?
Well, it wasn't, at that time, it really wasn't choice. It was alcohol was hard to come by. After I was in France, I was on the beach. I was one of the beach commanders, and we got the word that there was a lot of liquor, and this was where France was divided into and had divided Germany and annexed some of it, but in the southern part of France, the word came out that there was lots of good wine, brandy. And I remember I signed authorization for 2 trucks. and these guys took, there was about 4 or 5 of them. I'd have probably would never have survived if anybody, that hadn't gone right. But we went down there and got loaded 2 trucks with really good wine, brandy, not any whiskey, but, and as a matter of fact, they told me that there was a shortage of communion wine
Right.
in some of the areas. And we'd taken it all, but it was good wine.
Well, now, talk us through preparations for the invasion. What are you guys doing for training? And
Well, we're a bunch of just college kids that have gone through the basic training, and there's a whole bunch of boots in upstate New York, and we just got word that go meet the train, there's your troops.
right.
So that's where I met the people I worked with, and there were set up at that time a whole series of amphibious bases all along the East Coast and then all the way into Louisiana. And depending on a lot of different things, you might end up in one situation or another. But what the real demand was for at that time was small boat officers, people that could, you're no lower
Right.
creature on the face of the earth than a small boat officer.
When did you see your first Higgins boat?
Well, actually, I drove one. We took at one point we took an LST, which is a big ship, and we went up the river. Higgins had factories all up and down Mississippi River, and we could go up. We could get up with the LST. We could go up above New Orleans a bit, but not much. And then we just went up to this, I think, where we picked these boats up was on the, I can't even think of the name of the place now, but anyway, we went up and right to the factory and got the boat. And it had never been driven before, and everybody had some crew with them, and so we drove the damn boats right down the Mississippi River
Wow.
to the LST, and that was what was used to transport. The LST was loaded with all kinds of stuff, and but we had. All my boats were on deck of the LST, and I rode with them till we got to England.
Okay.
And
How long did that take you to get to England?
a long time. LSTs travel 8 knots.
Right. So we're talking like Couple weeks?
Oh, we were en route more than a month.
Okay,
See, you don't go in a straight line.
right,
You zigzag
right.
I forget the time of day. Every day, orders would come out over the radio on the pattern that you're following.
Right.
And you oftentimes would see these submarines tailing you. They could go a lot faster than we could.
Right.
And they'd surface, look around, put their periscope up to see.
Right.
And what they were after, the choice target was tankers carrying
Right.
high octane gas.
Did you have any issues with any of them? Did you run into any problems with German U-boats and stuff?
Well, we lost a lot of ships, relatively speaking. I don't know how many ships. That convoy was so big. Front to back, as I recall it, it was about eight ships,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just like that. And you couldn't see the end either side of it. The ships would be below the so far that you couldn't tell what was over there.
Any of them close to you as far as troubles?
Oh yeah. We had a U-boat surface. That's when I was on duty. Surface right between us.
That's a problem.
It's close. If I would have had a hand grenade or something, I could have hit that sucker on the
Holy
on
cow.
the deck. But
Well, obviously you guys survived. What happened? What happened with that U-boat then? Did he attack?
well, I don't know. You never. The U-boats were on the East Coast. You could have air cover, so they had to be pretty careful. But the further you got out, the fewer planes that would get out to you.
Right.
So you were at, I don't remember, 300, well, maybe not even that much, had an air cover over the top of you. And a U-boat is apparently, I've never seen it from the air, but a pilot can see a U-boat in the water. And so they've got to be careful for their own neck.
Right.
And but they would come along, and it was a game of, get as much of this stuff through as you can.
Right.
And but I wouldn't have any idea how many ships were hit with that. But it was, you wrote them off as they went down, and you never saw the either side of the convoy. That was so big. I mean, this was a massive thing, and it was cargo ships and people like LSTs that couldn't go any faster, and it was an 8-knot convoy. Okay, if you want to do the arithmetic on that one,
Right.
And not going in a straight line, you
Right.
zigzagging, but
So you make it to England.
yeah.
What kind of training and preparation did you do that was beneficial, let's say, when you finally do D-Day?
Well, we had one. We did a massive training on the coast of England, and these names escape me right now. And as a matter of fact, we lost some ships on those because the Germans came in, they knew what we were doing, and once we were doing our dress parade for going over across the channel, they just came up and messed with us. And
With what? What are they bringing in?
well, in that case, they even had some PT boats. I mean, they see where we were, it was probably, I don't know, 23 miles across the channel.
Right.
And at that time, they owned all the territory on the French side.
Right.
So it wasn't much of a trip to run over and dump a couple of American ships.
And what are you guys doing? You're actually doing landings?
That's what.
Then
yeah,
back on.
That's where you work on your timing and how you deal with certain kinds of situations.
Right.
And then I guess we laid off England for I can't think of anything that marked time, but I'm guessing that I was in England. We were probably 6 or 8 months getting ready for the invasion.
And when did you know then you were actually going to do this invasion? How much notice?
Well, you knew that you were going to do it, but about, I think, 3 days before the invasion, you had packets of maps, instructions, and everything, really top secret stuff. And you had, some of my boats were used to deliver that stuff to the ships. You had to carry all of that stuff. Every ship that was in that was going to go across needed to have one of these packets so they knew where the hell they should be. And so we were, then you went into, I think it was about 3 days, you went into lockdown. Nobody could go off of the ship. Nobody could go on a ship. And there were just people that had official duties like communications of materials and that sort of thing that needed to be delivered. So you knew sometime, the day that you made that trip, you still didn't know what your target was going to be.
Okay.
You knew some of the general conditions. You knew that it was going to be a low tide landing, and you knew that it was the conditions of the beach out there. I don't know if you've ever seen that beach, but it's a flat, probably a mile. At low tide, probably a mile and a half.
Right.
When I was over there, the last time I was over there, they were having horse races on it with, what the hell do they call these two-wheeled?
Yeah, we had that in Cuxhaven.
The chariot races.
We had that in Cuxhaven.
Yeah,
Yeah, the sake races, the
Yeah.
harness
yeah.
type races.
Two-wheelers.
Now, what kind of ship are you on for the invasion?
I'm carried to the beach on an LST. That's
Okay.
some of the stuff in this. I just glanced at this last night. I didn't even remember that it existed, but I have in this described a little bit that the main troop carriers were 6 miles offshore,
Okay.
and our job was to pick people up off of the personnel carriers, the big ships that were loaded with troops,
Right.
take them in the boats. And so we would, once I was cut loose from the LST, then I had no further contact with that except when I'd happened to run into them.
So when you get off the LST now, you're responsible for how many Higgins boats?
Well, it varies. The first assault I had 6 boats, and after that then you kept shrinking because you kept losing boats all the time.
Now, the first time you go in, so you have 6 boats,
Yeah,
you're on one of them.
yeah.
How are you communicating and how far apart are you as you're working your way to the beach?
Well, you're very close together. The beach defenses were made up of railroad rails, and they were sticking up like that, and you could see those mostly. You could see them at low tide, but if you were coming in when the tide was half tide, you couldn't see that stuff, and that's why we lost a lot of boats. Is that they'd come, I mean, with the type of boat we had, I mean, you never did anything slow, you did it fast.
Right.
Because you were moving target. But if you got up to a certain level of tide, you couldn't tell where the Navy was supposed to have cleared channels there, and it never happened. We had, what you had was a big clutter of boats when you went up to the beach.
Who are you taking in, specifically the troops?
What the people I carried were all from the 29th Division, which I found out later included a few folks from Hagerstown, and I never even said hi to them.
What was their attitude as you're going in the first time?
Well, soldiers can't get off of a boat fast enough.
Right.
I mean, they hate being on water. So you get on the beach, some of the stuff we learned was the mechanics of the way the water moves sand, so that on a beach you might have at certain stages in the tide, or in the tide, yeah, that you might just be going like hell on the beach and then fell in a 6-foot hole.
Right.
Because the sand that washed the sand, and it was never the same.
Now, are these guys talking as you're going in? Are they quiet? Are they praying? What are they doing?
Well, we carried, when we were getting ready to go to the beach, I was on the LST before I'd loaded my boats off, and I went down, and the LST is a big open box that carries lots of tanks and stuff. But they had I don't know, must have had a couple thousand soldiers on there.
Right.
And I can tell you what they were doing, they're shooting craps.
Okay.
They got paid, and there was several of those people came away well-to-do. I don't know if they ever got back with it or not. But no, it was, you went below deck, you had the lights out, but down below deck, hell, everything was, they were feeding people and whatever. Some people would curl up in a corner and go to sleep, but mostly just to get away from it. But I never unloaded those troops off of that boat. I went to another personnel carrier, and that's a big ship. And they had rope ladders. I don't know if you've ever seen those things. They're knit together,
Right.
and they're probably, one of them is maybe 10 or 12 feet long, and then they just throw that over the side,
Right.
and the small boat is laying right alongside of this big damn ship. I mean, you
Right.
look up there and there's a Yahoo's watching
More
you.
than 10 feet.
Yeah.
But the ladder comes down, the rope, and then you have to, my crew had to get the bottom of that ladder and bring it on the inside of our boat, because some of those guys couldn't navigate this, they'd fall off. So if you had a soldier coming down, you didn't want him to come down in the water between the boat and the ship,
Right.
because he wouldn't last long there. So we had to be sure that once they started down on the rope ladders, that we kept that so that as many troops as came down, we wanted to be sure that we didn't drown some of them en route.
Right.
And then once you get loaded, I would take, at a predetermined area, I'd take my responsible boats, and we'd just go in a circle. And once we got the signal that we would proceed to the beach, then all of this was taking place at 6 miles offshore.
Okay.
And that's what I read this as. I wrote down a lot of that stuff.
How long does it take you then to get to the beach?
Well, as fast as we could go. I can't tell you. It's probably, 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay. Talk us through that first time in particular, as you're bringing them in. What are you seeing, smelling, feeling as you're going in?
Well, you're seeing. I wasn't the first wave. I was in the second wave. What you're seeing is just one hell of a lot of chaos. And by the time we got there, there were boats and dead bodies and everything else all over the place. But the plan was they gave us maps. I had a map that showed where theoretically they had cleared a path into the beach.
Right.
And sometimes that's true and sometimes it wasn't. But we learned, after several trips, we learned to kind of use our own eyes and ears, and the hell with what's written on the paper.
How many guys were on the ship?
Huh?
How many guys were on one Higgins boat?
60.
So if you had 6, there were 360 guys. Something
Yeah.
like that.
Now, how are you communicating with the landing with your other boats you're responsible for?
We were doing a lot of that with flags. We didn't have any radio communication. And I was a command boat, so I had certain identifying flags so that people would kind of, any time we needed to get together, they'd kind of rendezvous together, and we'd kind of, because every trip you'd lose some.
Right.
So you get down to the point where you were almost from the first landing, you were consolidating. In other words, you just kept shrinking the command requirements, and
Yeah.
everybody did it.
Now, first time you're going in, with the boats you're responsible for, are you all going in at the same time, or are
Yeah.
you going in, coming out, and another one's coming in?
Well, that's what the problem was, but we all, the boats that were carrying troops, it was theoretical, but you kind of had the right of way. And so you'd go through and hopefully you'd miss all of the railroad ties and irons and stuff, and we could unload a boat in about 40 seconds. I mean, those soldiers weren't anxious to stay with us.
Right.
They went in, and
Now, when you go in, are you getting hit by enemy fire when you're landing?
yeah,
And what all are you getting hit by?
well, it's mostly small arms fire. There was some 88 millimeter artillery, but mostly, and it wasn't very effective. The Higgins boat has a steel door on it,
Right.
and once you got within 2 miles of the beach, then you started hearing this ping, ping, and that was small arms fire coming up against you. And you'd lose quite a few people en route and never made it to the beach.
And that's from incoming artillery?
Well, it's mostly, yeah, 88 millimeters.
Right.
But you see, the Germans had those, where you were landing, at least on my beach, there was a steep cliff.
Right.
And they had that sucker filled with, they were all, it was concrete, and hell, they had kitchens and bunk rooms and all that stuff. They lived there.
Did you know when you made that first run where you was landing?
Well, I knew where the map said I should land.
How far off were you then
I
from?
don't think we were too bad,
Okay.
but if you got enough boats disabled, you couldn't really get in, then you had to kind of wing it, where if you could see a spot that you might take some people off, you'd do it. You did whatever you had to do to get people on the beach, because that was the whole name of the game.
Now, are you losing guys when that gate goes down and the enemy's firing? Are you losing guys?
Oh yeah. That the first run, it was probably worst, but then as you gradually see, there was a huge number of ships that were firing. There were barges that had I don't know the size of the shells but were set up. Maybe a barge had 20 or 30 guns on it, and they would just keep popping that stuff out. But the Germans all had all of this stuff sighted. I went up into those bunkers later, and every place there was a gun emplacement, there were pictures of the beach to show exactly, if you want to hit this part of the beach, this is what you set your gun at.
Okay.
Pretty well developed. Hell, they'd been sitting up there working on it for a long time. They should have been good at it.
Well, now your losses. You go in, you put the gate down, they're firing, you got guys jumping off. The casualties that are on your boat, once you've left everybody off that you can leave off, I assume you're going back with casualties.
Well, that depends. You don't carry any bodies back,
Okay.
but there's judgments have to be made on that. Our boats had stretchers that we carried for those, and there were cleats on each side of the boat. And for wounded, you could put them on a stretcher and carry them that way, and then when you got back to a hospital ship or whoever would take them away from you, then they'd send lines down and straps, and so you'd get them on board.
Now, how about the dead? If somebody was killed on your boat during the landing, what happens to that body at that point?
Well, probably you just throw it off.
Okay.
You don't think about last rites at that point.
Right. Because you got to get in and get out.
Yeah, and you don't know, even in that situation, a lot of times you don't even know who's been hit.
Right.
You put 60 guys in a little boat like that, and you don't really have a lot of room to wiggle around.
And how many's on your crew on your boat?
I had a coxswain, and I had a signalman, and one deckhand, and one. The hell am I? I've got four. A boat crew is 4 people, and I've been with the same group. The troops that we rode into the beach with were the ones that we'd picked up in the railroad station as boots coming out of upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to sit at night in that Quonset hut, and we started out, and there was, say, 500 boots, and you could look and kind of get some notion about big, small, or Italian, or what. And we'd sit up and trade. At that time, they hadn't been assigned to specific crews, and I decided right away that with the variety of ethnic crew that was available to me, I was gonna. That's what I used to form my crews. My own personal boat crew with Italian, and I had one crew that came from upstate New York, and they were, God only knows whatever comes from upstate New York.
Did you stay on the same Higgins boat during the day of June 6th?
I think I had my boat. I lost the boat before the end of the day, but
When you say lost, what happened? Run aground? You got hit, or what?
any of those things.
Okay.
And so there was always lots of loose gear and boats and everything that was, the occupants weren't there anymore, and you just picked them up and appropriated them to whatever you want.
Now, your first run, what would you estimate number of casualties?
I don't know that you can really, I could really tell. And there were, on the boat I was riding on, there were a number of casualties, but where there was a lot of casualties was where once they got off of the boat, then there was a long open stretch of beach that there wasn't anything to hide behind.
Right.
And up close, when you got up to high water, then you started to get old rock fences and stuff like that, where you could kind of squat down and catch your breath.
What was visibility like?
Well, it was all right. We were, that, the day of the landing, as I recall, it doesn't, we were, I don't think, I don't remember I don't recall that weather was any factor at all, but
What's the sound? What's it sound like? I mean, you got machine gun fire, you got artillery.
it's noisy.
Yep, your own boat, the other boats.
It's like a team.
I sat next to, I was trying to think of that name. There was a battleship that was right next to the places that,
You want me to make a copy? Would you like a
Yeah,
copy
yeah,
of
we'll
it?
get a copy of it.
well,
I can make a copy.
I forget which one was, well, this is first draft of
Right.
some material, and I've got more material, but I haven't found it.
Thank you.
So after your first run, you're coming back to pick up another group.
Yeah,
Was the conditions worse than you anticipated or the same as you might have anticipated?
well, I don't think you really anticipated, you didn't have experience, but once you went through that one time, then you were experienced.
Right.
And I had good, in my own personal boats, I had good, well-trained bosuns, because you needed that kind of backup. And if something had happened to me, I had people that would just pick up and do what had to be done.
Right.
And but my job, I was detached from the ship. That was the last thing the captain ever did for me, was give me my set of orders and said, don't come back.
How many trips did you make that day?
Oh, I suppose some of the boats would have made, a dozen or more trips. I had other duties. I was to report to the beach master to control all of the,
At what time did you do that? In other words, did you make a couple of runs and then get a foothold on the beach and then you go in? Or when did you land on the beach?
I don't remember, but no, you don't. I never left the boats until it became apparent that somebody had to be in charge of
Right.
the boats, and it didn't need to be me. And so I had as quickly as you could, you established control on the beach, and that was, I was a part of the beach masters,
Right.
and you had, that was the point where those people knew at least some approximation of where the ships were, what they were carrying, and you would get that information as soon as a cargo ship came into your area. Then they would report that who they were, and see, you didn't have, what you had was several thousand ships all anchored out there.
Right.
They weren't moving around. They were anchored. There was, and so it's a very fluid situation.
Now, would you have been on the beach on June 6th, or did that be later?
Well, I was there pretty early,
Okay.
but there wasn't, except for doing any organizing of regrouping boats and stuff like that. That was, once that initial activity was over, then I could move more to a broader scale of what was out there and what we had to do to get it in.
Right.
But there was a battleship. I was looking for the name of that battleship. There was no battleship that they had brought over, and it just happened to be right next to where we were working the beach. And that one had, I think, 15-inch guns on it. And somebody asked about, was it noisy? When that sucker fired, you could almost see the projectile going. It was like they were shooting a small Volkswagen or something. But they were in there, and they were targeting 20 miles inland. I mean, those 15-inchers had a pretty long range on them.
Now, before we go any further, can you tell us the ping pong ball story?
Well, we were going in, and the boat next to me got hit with something. I don't know what it was, whether it was a mine or what. And this is what made this kind of amusing, was that, you know, you're carrying shock troops in, and you're really, everybody's trying to kill you. And this boat blew up, and it was loaded with ping pong balls. I mean, all over. The ocean in that immediate area was just white with them. And I even picked a couple of them up and put them in my pocket just to be sure that I knew what I was talking about. But
And what are we going to use ping pong balls for on the invasion on D-Day?
well, did you ever watch a ship get loaded? Is all you got to do is move. We actually did this at one time in a little different situation. But we were tied up, the docks, I think we were tied up in Rhode Island, and these piers were, you know, a couple miles long.
Right.
And so a ship comes alongside, you tie up to the ship, and it's supposed to be all the paperwork is taken care of, and everybody knows what's going to be loaded on you. But somehow or other somebody screwed, maybe on purpose, and got a load of ping pong balls, put clear up to the front of the line with and whatever hit that thing, it just, like that.
Boom.
And it was pretty funny and a deadly situation.
Is there any other stories you can share with us on the landings that always stuck out, you know, in your mind?
Well, I think I knew the man I was working with, but under stress, you never quite knew how people were going to behave.
Right.
And there were some people should never have been put into that kind of duty.
Right.
I remember, I was trying to think of his first name, a little Jewish boy named Brinkman. And he was, he had been, you know, kicked around and determined he was going to be it was determined he was going to be a crew in one of these boats. But when we went, Brickman totally collapsed, and he made a couple of trips in, and he just assumed kind of a fetal position and crawled into the corner of the boat, and I didn't do anything with him. He just went for the ride.
Right.
But when I got to a point where I could get a corpsman to take him, and he was, you know, he was psychologically wasn't equipped
Right.
to deal with something like that, and probably never been away from home much before, but that little kid's sticks in my head
Right.
of, you know, what happens. He should have been screened out and put in a commissary someplace sorting socks or something like that. Don't put him up in the front.
When you make that first trip, now you got a little experience. When you're going back in, what's your thoughts? Are you just concentrating on getting these men in this boat in the right place?
Yeah, you gain experience all the time when you're doing it, and you know the timing on it is critical. And the first several trips, you discover that your life depends on you're getting in and out in a minute or something like that.
Are you afraid, or are you just concentrating so much that
You don't think.
Yeah. You don't, I never really, sometime later, and after it took several belts of whiskey to kind of calm down.
right?
But no, you know, I guess you're so focused that I've got grandchildren that are in their 20s, and when I took that responsibility on, I was 22 years old, and basically had, you know, probably 4 or 5 months training,
You were 22,
Right.
and never
23.
had anything to do with saltwater. But yet somebody decided that, okay, that's a billet, he's gonna fill it, and this is what he's supposed to do, and he just did it. And it wasn't you didn't think about a lot of the other stuff, you just figured that I've got to get 300 soldiers from here over to here and get them as many there as I can. But there's a lot of, I think there's probably post-trauma stress that, you know, World War II, you didn't much concern yourself about that kind of stuff. And so it's a kind of a different thing today. I'm assuming they do better screening and that sort of thing. Maybe not.
Did your training help, or was a lot of it you're learning as you're going?
Well, you had to. I was a Boy Scout, so I knew how to tie knots.
Right.
But no, I was really a good officer because I had a tendency to listen to people if they want to tell me something. And a lot of people that had a little gold on their shoulders, once they got there, they'd say, look at that.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And you've got to have a cohesive group, and I would break the rules of the Navy many times. I mean, I'd go out and drink a little beer with some of them, and it probably, that familiarity isn't great, but I think at the same time I had respect from the people that I was working with.
And what was your group? Who were you assigned to when you did
Well,
Normandy? And what was your rank? What were you at that time when you did the invasion?
I was an ensign.
Okay.
That's, well, I think someplace along the line I timed out and made another half strike, but that was basically your lowest. They're the ones that they throw in the troops first.
And who were you assigned to? What was the name of your unit?
Well, I was assigned for transport and
You have like a number designation? Because I don't know how you guys are set up in the Navy with.
well, you're trained as groups. I'm in charge. When I start out, I had 4 boat crews.
Right.
They weren't 4 boat crews, they were just 4 people that were supposed to be turned into boat crews. And I didn't have any experience.
Right.
But
Now you're in transport, but do you guys have like a numeral designation?
no,
You're just in transport.
yeah.
Okay.
So after the Normandy invasion, following that, you ended up staying in Normandy then, correct?
Yeah, I was there until, I actually was a specialist in management of cargo and stuff like that. So I was assigned,
Yeah,
look on the wall just over my desk. I think there's a set of orders in there.
okay. All right,
They're in a frame.
yeah.
You know, I can't think of anything that I was identified with. Mostly you're identified with a vessel.
You know, he also was in the Pacific after that.
Right. Yeah, we want to get into the Pacific
Yeah.
thing too.
Is that what you're looking for?
You know,
Yeah. You want me to show you?
that's the set of orders I went to France with on.
Okay.
Here you go.
And it doesn't
I
say,
can clean it off, make you a copy.
after you get done, come on home. It just said, go to talk to that guy, you're his now.
But you
And-
told me you buried so many in France. You
Pardon?
buried so many on the front
Yeah,
in France. Over 3,000.
but there's a lot of,
Good things.
it's amazing the amount of, if you exercise, like in a lot of things, if you exercise judgment and command, people respect it. You may not have the authority to back it up even, but
Were you guys responsible for burials and stuff as well, or are you just
No.
getting transport?
See if I can make a copy for this.
I stayed on the beach.
I can't take it out.
2 or 3 days after the invasion, I was on the beach and somebody came by with, some of my troops came by with, they had, by this time were working out of kind of loosely formed work gangs, and said, come on, we're gonna go, we're picking up bodies. So I just jumped on the truck, and we literally just, we just drove the beach, and as bodies had washed up and what have you, we'd pick them up. We weren't the guys that put them in bags or anything, but, and it's kind of, it emphasizes to you the immensity of what you're involved in.
How many bodies would you have picked up on that particular run?
What, dozen. See, there was an awful lot of people got killed on that.
Right.
But you remember some things. I was going, I don't know what I was doing. I was going on something on the beach, and I came up on this little guy that had been hit with shrapnel, and his clothes were all torn off, his belly was open, and he was sitting there trying to stick his guts back in again.
Right.
And he was oblivious to me, and I always carried a whole bag of morphine.
Let me have your card.
And,
Sorry, there was a mistake. That's page 2.
He was not really aware that I was there, but there had been 2 other people. If you gave anybody morphine, then you marked an M in their forehead.
Yeah, I can
Right.
staple it together
And
if you did it.
my guess is he probably never lived long enough to get to
Yeah,
first aid
sorry
station.
about that.
Right.
But those are things you really, they're in your head. You can't get them out. And it's nasty business.
Tell us about the what you saw in like the pillboxes and stuff, afterwards.
Well, what the Germans had done was they had dug in on the very top of this hill, and they had nice, well, not sheer curtains or anything, but they had nice eating spaces. They had a good kitchen, and there was the crews that were manning those guns. That's where they lived, and I assumed that every so often a truck would come along, drop off some groceries for them. I don't know,
Right.
but that was kind of surprising.
How far inland did you go then?
Well, I was assigned to Cherbourg, which was up on the end. It was a main line port where we could get ships into the dock.
Right.
That was the real problem when you make a landing like this, is that initially you can use small boats to carry what you need and get it onto the beach, but that doesn't, what you need is tanks and heavy armor and that sort of stuff. And so they opened up, Cherbourg got opened, that whole peninsula was cut off and then was opened up. And there were a lot of Germans were captured in that operation, but we weren't fussing about those at that time. What we wanted was to have those docks cleared so that you could bring ships in. And, you know, once you got that, you could unload a lot of cargo.
How long did you remain then in France?
I think I left France maybe in October,
Okay.
maybe the 1st of November. I went back to
Probably
England
doesn't do it.
and then got
Comes
on
out totally black, unreadable. I might take it downstairs. I'll see. You have a better copy.
But I was slated to go immediately. They were planning the landing in Japan,
Right.
and they were gathering together all of the people that had experience in landings, and I got swept up in that. We went to New York, and did nothing but sit around drinking beer. Once a day, you'd go in and check in with a yeoman and let him know you were still around. But I had gained friendship with a young officer that was like myself, and we were talking and said, you know, I wonder if we could influence the process a little bit. What would happen if we just go down to Washington and talk to him in person? Is what we did. We got on the damn train and went to Washington, and at that time the Navy had a lot of Quonset huts on the mall, and we found the one that was handling orders, and sweet talked a female yeoman and just told her we were sick and tired of eating sand and crawling around on beaches, and we wanted to get into some ships that are real Navy ships.
Right.
And about a week later, I got orders to go to the Saratoga, which was, at that time, was the biggest carrier they had in the fleet. And my friend got on a battleship. So she just had picked us off and moved us over into another box.
Right.
But what they were doing was, back then they were sorting out the people that would be used in landing in
Right.
Japan.
So how'd you get to the Saratoga?
How did I get there? Well, I got there with you kind of caught, the Sarah was out in the far west, and you just kind of hitchhiked on ships that were going in that direction.
Where did you leave then from the West Coast? Did you go across by train?
Well, I went on train to the West Coast. I reported in and was immediately placed on transport.
And where'd you leave from? Did you north in San Francisco or?
Well, I'm trying to think when I left, either from San Francisco or some of this I went down to Long Beach, and there was a big Navy facility there, and they just, if you had large contingents or if you had singles, like I had just singles to go to the far west to go to that particular.
Magnifying glass, you can read it.
So you end up on the Saratoga.
It's because of this, but I could read it.
And-
Now what?
Well,
You want something to drink, Mervyn? Would you like some water or something?
I don't think so.
Or anybody else?
Okay.
No?
Thank you.
Okay.
The Saratoga got hit, and we went back, had to go back to Bremerton to get major repairs
And
done.
when you say it got hit, by what?
Kamikazes. And they took 6 kamikazes on board. And they had, Sarah was an old-fashioned ship. She was actually, the hull was laid down as a battle cruiser. And so there's that much steel underwater. Torpedoes would just bounce off of that ship.
And what's your responsibility on the Saratoga?
When I got on the Saratoga, I was responsible for everything on a carrier is at an aircraft.
Right.
And I was assigned responsibility for maintenance of starboard side guns, which were, I didn't have any 5-inch on the, we had 5-inch guns, but our anti-aircraft guns were banks of 40 millimeters, and so I had the full length of the ship. They had those in gun sponsons, so that they could fire. Well, they were firing 8 barrels, and they were hooked to the magazine, so that when you started, when you were starting to shoot, there was an elevator just came right up into your gun sponson, and the people that were manning those guns would just keep feeding ammunition. I mean, 40 millimeters, about like that. And
How often did you have to use them?
the Sarah was hit with kamikazes, and I don't think she ever was in a battle situation after that.
Now the kamikazes, how much notice do you have they're coming in?
Well, they don't call ahead. No, they usually would, depending, they'd fly in low.
You know, like how far out could you see, and then the word gets around that we're being attacked?
Well, there's eyes and ears all over a ship, and they're all hooked up together in a communications, and that's focused on the captain's deck. And so the intelligence of what you know and where you know it and all the rest of it is all focused into one spot, where you're steering the ship, you're doing whatever has to be done, and you get your communication with your boiler rooms and all your propulsion things.
What do they tend to do with these ships? Speed up when they know they're being attacked? Or
Well, you can't, probably not. You can't, a plane, the ship is going 30 knots, and it's going in zigzagging for evasion, but in these little fighter planes, the kamikaze was a kind of a desperation on the part of the Japanese that, and these pilots actually, it was a one-way trip for them. They couldn't even get out of the plane. And you never, they were very effective, and they would sank a lot of ships.
Like, how close are you when a kamikaze came in, hit the ship? How close to you was that?
Well, it just depends on where the hell you're standing. They're attacking the side of the ship. They're attacking. See, all of your on a carrier, your planes are all down on the hangar deck, underneath the deck, and so you've got all these. The planes aren't sitting up on top deck. You've got them. They're all stored in.
Right.
And the real problem with the Saratoga was that it only had the one elevator to move planes off of the hangar deck up on the main deck. And once you lost that, messed up that elevator, then you couldn't move planes between decks. And you were, as far as being an aircraft carrier, you were really not any good.
How many times when you were on board that ship did your ship get hit by kamikazes?
Well, I suppose half a dozen times. I don't really remember that.
And what are you guys thinking? Are you thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to get sunk? Or are you thinking, we can handle this?
Well, I don't know. I never thought about that kind of stuff. I knew what I had to do, and I had to be sure that all the guns on the starboard side were functioning,
Right.
and that they were tied into the system.
What problems would you run into typically with your guns as far as maintenance and stuff goes? What's your biggest concerns?
Well, every gun would be torn down and put back together again regularly. I mean, you get salt, and salt air is deadly on weapons like that. So you're constantly battling to be sure that if you're dealing with systems that sometimes, when at the beginning of the thing, we didn't have systems tied together. Before the war was over, you had gunnery control, central control, so that you could aim all of the guns on the starboard side or on the port side and do it centrally. And as all the operators, sailors had to do was just keep feeding ammunition into them. And
Do you fire any of the guns yourself at the enemy coming in, or you're just directing them?
No, the firing on an aircraft carrier is all centrally controlled, and the gunnery officer, the captain, whoever's is given the orders, has. And once you got radar, and that, there was a point at the early part of the war when you didn't have radar, and
That's right.
and it was, these guns were all manually dealt with, but the later carriers had controls so that you could bring a hell of a lot of gunfire to. I had an incident that was kind of funny. We were coming out of the shipyards, and the shipyard people were responsible when you were in the yard. They called the shots on what you had work orders with the shipyard, and most of those people doing the work on it were civilians. And but when the shipyard says we've done everything that the orders wanted us to do, then you go out and take the ship out,
Right.
and test it all with your own troops. And on this occasion, we were testing the carrier had fore and aft of the main controls had 5-inch guns that were, and so we had at that time taken on, I don't remember, maybe 400 or 500 boots for replacement purposes. And so I had, my job in that was when we went out to fire, that was to line all these guys up. They'd never seen a gun fired before, and it was a big deal. And so we were all lined up. A carrier also on the edge of the flight deck has nets on there, about, as I recall it, about a foot below the level of the flight deck. There are these big nets,
Right.
so that, and occasionally you need to get the hell out of the way of something quick, and you can just go over the edge of the flight deck and you're in the net. But I had these troops lined up, and I was talking to them, telling them all what's going to happen, and the guns were trained, and the guns were pointing different directions, and then I said, finding out they're loading those guns and they're going to fire them, so it's going to make a big noise. And they got that damn gun up, and somebody, I never did know the mechanism, but somebody hadn't locked that barrel in place. So here we were watching that damn firing demonstration, and that was just supposed to be a projectile going out,
Right.
but somebody forgot to lock the barrel, so the whole barrel went whoop. and I looked around me and I didn't have a single sailor waiting there. They all were over the deck. They were over the side in nets. It was a hell of a poor way to introduce them to.
How far did the barrel go out?
Well, it went out, it was headed forward. We never retrieved it, I know that.
So just a question, did radar then pick up the kamikazes coming? They would have picked up the kamikazes coming, the radar?
Well,
No?
in the very early stages, you didn't have very good communication,
Oh,
and your
on your ship.
radar didn't. It wasn't, by the time the war's over, it was pretty good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on then the potential invasion of Japan?
I'm just glad that we never did it.
How much preparation work did you do, and how much
Well-
notice did you have that this might happen?
Well, I got out, and at that time I was out of the amphibious forces, and had a billet on a carrier, and I reported for duty on that, and then the carrier was going back into Bremerton for major repairs.
Right.
And by the time we got out, we had so many carriers out in the far west that they were kind of getting in each other's way. And by the time we got out, again, we went to Pearl Harbor, and there were, because of the size of our deck and everything, that young pilots that were just coming out, you know, they had to get experience landing on the deck, and that ours was about the biggest deck that was out there. So we spent a lot of time then in Pearl just qualifying young pilots that they could go on to the next level, which would to be assigned to a carrier.
Right.
But the pilots, as I remember, they were never really assigned to a carrier, but that was a unit unto themselves, and they always traveled. If they were moved from one carrier to the next, or moved to the base, on land base, they moved as a unit. And they never even, I think they had their own mess, as I recall it. And a bunch of smart asses.
Where are you at war's end?
I was on the carrier, but I didn't have anything particular to do in mind, so they started offering up some really nice billets, and you could sign on. I had plenty of points and all the rest of the stuff to get out, but they were losing officers so fast that they were doing everything they could to hold people. And so you'd get these memorandum coming through almost every day that, how would you like to go here or here? You could almost choose your spot. And I had never really spent much time in New Orleans, and I thought, no, that probably would be as much fun to wash the war off of me as anything I could think of. So I said I would be willing to take a 6-month assignment in the depot. Navy had a big weapons depot right across the river. I mean, you could practically swim over to it from New Orleans. And so I signed on and got no trouble, got a billet over there, and I just extended my stay, and I landed. I went. We were going by train, and there were several people. I remember we were on the deck or on the station in Oakland, California, And we discovered that we were all headed in the same general direction. So we started negotiating with anybody, and we managed to get all in. We had one car on that on that train, and it was constant party. But I got to New Orleans and arrived at the main gate of the depot, and there was one guard just sitting there, and I said, "What? I'm reporting for duty." And he said, "Oh, there's nobody around now." He said, "This is Mardi Gras, you know." and he said, "Why don't you?" He told me where to go. He said, "If you want to get a bunk, the officers' quarters we'll take you up there and you can sign in." But he said, "They're not going to be around here for 2 or 3 days now."
And what's your rank at that point?
Well, I probably was a 2-star lieutenant then, or maybe lieutenant commander. And so I just went and freshened up a little bit and went right back to New Orleans. And it was fun. It took a lot out of me, but
How long did you stay in the service then at that time after?
I got, after my New Orleans tour, I got out pretty fast then, but I was in the reserve for, I think, 15 years after that.
Because then Korea comes
Yeah.
up. What was your
Well,
involvement in Korea?
I came back to, I was released, and then when Korea came along, I had a specialty of basically manning ships. That was, and we had whole rows of destroyers World War II destroyers that were just tied up in Mobile, Alabama, and a few of those other southern ports, and we're just doing maintenance work on them to be sure they weren't rusting all to pieces. And so they started activating those ships, and I was the guy that knew what kind of skills you needed to go on there, and so I spent most of my time in Great Lakes, Illinois, which was the headquarters for the reserves. They were calling the reserves back in again, and so we worked. That was the main thing that I did in the Korean War, was to bring the crews back. The Navy had certain types of enlistments and certain types of crews. They could call you back, period. But there were other people that they could offer incentives, and it depended on what the skill level was of the individuals. And if you had a lot of navigational skills were always short. You usually could deal with the boiler room stuff. That skill was available, but what I did was, there were about, I don't know, I suppose 30 of us that had available all of the records of people that were within certain age groups and certain skill levels. There were certain skills you didn't need them. You just didn't call them up. And that was, I don't remember how long that lasted, but it was basically manning the ships that we had just taken troops off of. And put into mothballs.
So once you get out of the service then, what do you do then for a career, and where do you
I
live?
didn't do a damn thing. I just had money in my pocket. No, I wanted to do a graduate program, and I had my choice. I'd been accepted to UCLA and several other schools. And so I bought a bus ticket. I rode the bus wherever the hell I wanted to go. And at that time if you had a bus ticket, you could go any place you wanted. And I got out to UCLA, and I didn't like it. I mean, the layout on the thing, without an automobile or anything, just didn't feel right. And so I looked at the University of Denver on the way out and spent some time there, and I liked it. So I called up the dean of the business school and said, how about it? Can I get, come on back. And so I did. I went to school there for a couple of years and had a great time.
What was you majoring in at that point?
Well, at that point I was headed for management, and that basically was a broad field, but there's a lot of aspects of that you don't, the first time through, you don't take time to really study it. But with doing a graduate program, I could spend much more time in the psychology of the thing, and computers were just moving in as big time, and were taking over a lot of the real chores that had been done sort of just not very scientifically.
What career did you get into then?
You don't know the computers either.
What the hell did I do?
I know you told me you got into buying some farms and stuff, here in Washington County. How'd you end up in Washington County?
Well, he was first in Washington.
On a bus.
Agricultural department.
Right, but didn't you tell me you were stationed, you were down in D.C.?
I worked after I finished
18.
my master's program. I went to work for the Department of Labor,
No.
and the department, this was right after, not too long after the war, and there were a lot of programs being put in place adjustment programs, people coming out of service. And I had a program at one time that was made up entirely of mothers on welfare. I had contracts to take care of 350,000 babies.
Jeez.
And that was kind of I never held them at night, but
Hope you wasn't the father at all then.
Only half.
but no,
Dad.
Well, laugh if you will.
I don't know what my other father that I've, known all my life's going to say about this, but
Did you not start Head Start?
Hmm?
Head
The
Start.
Head Start program?
I was with Head Start, yes.
Yeah, in the White House. Actually.
There was a lot of stuff in this was mostly in the Kennedy area that, we could and did contract out for training, for health services, for child care services. We had very broad. My first budget that I managed all of myself was $14 billion.
Wow.
That's a lot of money. And I never did anything. I just saw that the contractors met certain standards and that we were complying with the law. And I guess I churned along on different assignments in the department. I stayed with the department from then on. It was a good department to work for, and I always found good jobs and did pretty well.
Family. When you got married, did you get married before you went into service or after you came out?
No, quite a bit after.
Okay. How many children?
That's very
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah.
No, it's not too poor. I mean, kids. I mean, kids that you know of.
Okay.
How many kids did you claim on your taxes?
Yeah, there you go.
I had two daughters. Both of them are very grand kids. They're kids. They're in their 60s now.
Right.
And matter of fact, Paul is coming here the end of this week, and
Mm-hmm. Next Saturday.
Where do they live?
well, Paula lives in Connecticut, and the other one is in Chicago. Sydney is I never quite understand everything she does, but she's with the University of Chicago.
She runs the doctoral programs for
Okay.
Yeah, she,
literature.
and
Very successful doctors.
Paula she's retired. She worked with the company for 29 years and decided that she was going to go a different direction, and I keep in touch with them. They're good kids. I like them. And
That's good.
It's good when you like your kids.
well,
It's important that you like your kids.
if they didn't perform properly,
I bet.
then there would be a different relationship.
By the way, that's a picture of Merwin and his wife as a young man.
So, how did your experiences in World War II kind of shape your life? Did that change you at all? Did it make you a better person, or did it not have any effect?
No, if you're sensitive to what you were doing, you couldn't help but look at life a little differently. But I went into the service. I was just barely 21, and you were out swinging a pretty wide swath, and so that kind of experience, I'm probably had more I was always a manager with a fairly soft touch. And I found very early that that worked much better than get your ass going, and I did enough of that in the Navy, but
Right.
no, it's been a good run. I've always had good assignments, good work relations in the department, and I had good jobs, paid good money, and that's when my kids were raised in College Park. And
How do you think the effects of the Depression had on you with World War II?
well, the Depression had more effect than almost anything else, because there was so much uncertainty, and you watched good craftsmen sitting on a bench and waiting for something to happen, and nothing did happen. And there was the period, I think the period in my life that was most uncertain was in that period from I was off in college in the 30s, and then the war came up, and I was packed my bags and went off on that little excursion.
Did you see Saving Private Ryan, the movie?
Yeah,
How accurate was those opening
very
scenes?
very realistic. I couldn't sit through the whole thing. It was, especially the front end of it. It was just, I just got out and left.
Any parts of that though that was inaccurate?
I don't really remember the details of it, but it was I thought portrayed the situation as it realistically was. I thought was quite, at least as I had experienced it myself.
Right. What was your rank when you got out of the service?
I was a commander. Still am.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Once a commander, always a commander. How many times have you gone back over to Normandy?
I don't know, I suppose 3 or 4. We used to go to Europe fairly often pretty much after our kids were big enough to take care of themselves, and so my wife and I, we'd go over and I'd usually make a trip to the beach. You pour a lot of stuff in there in a very short time.
What was your feelings going back and seeing those beaches?
Well, I recognized the beaches, and I recognized a lot of the tombstones of the people that we left there. And I cried a lot.
When people go back and they tour, what do you want them to take away from that experience?
I think, some people are there for some purposes and some for others. And you can never, I don't think you can ever really fully understand what a wartime situation is.
Right.
I mean, you carry away from there a lot of things that don't go away easily. And
What do you want somebody like myself, though, that goes and visits? What should we take away from that experience?
well,
I mean, is it the sacrifices, the remembrance of you guys, of what you did?
No more war.
well, I don't. It's awfully hard to say. People see all that stuff. I mean, I spent a lot of time on the beach, and I'd hold the bus up sometimes, and everybody would be looking out, when the hell is he going to get back?
Right. Right.
Had a lot of remembering to do, and several times I just went up there by myself.
Now, going back, did that provide some closure, maybe?
It's not a personal thing. I never have tried to make any judgments on right or wrong, or but I lived with a lot of that stuff for a good many years, and it's the further you get away from it, the easier it is, but you never quite.
Is there anything you would have or could have done different? Or
I suppose I could have just got on a truck and hauled ass out of there. But that wasn't
an option.
that wasn't really what I needed to do.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time on the beach, but I also spent a lot of time in going from Paris back and forth. I had duties. Some of it was pretty simple, just carrying classified mail, but
See, the reason I ask, as far as your feelings of going back and what we should take away, is because me being a guide at Antietam, since I never had a chance to talk to the Civil War veterans, but yet I give these tours representing them, it's important for me to get a feeling from somebody like yourself who was in combat of what we should be explaining to people that come and visit. In other words, what would you want me to tell them?
I don't know that. I don't know whether a person can actually do that. You have in a combat situation, you have a lot of things that are kind of gruesome and scary, and you have, in amongst that, you have some stuff that's kind of funny.
Yeah, like ping pong balls.
Yeah.
Just like finding a fire.
Yeah.
I had one one of the reasons I thought I would like to be in the Navy was I didn't want to deal with the enemy on a face-to-face basis.
Okay. Mhm.
But one day I found myself doing that.
Right.
And I was just taking a trip. You know what a duck is.
Right.
And we were using the ducks for hauling ammunition and that sort of stuff. So I had a time when I could be out of there. Most of the time I spent after the invasion, I spent figuring out how the hell you're going to get an awful lot of cargo
Right.
on shore as quick as you could. But I decided that maybe I needed to get a little closer. By that time, the front lines had moved off at the beach. You could still hear the gunfire, but it was a few miles away. And so I decided I'd just hitchhike a ride with a duck. But the Germans had, what they were doing is they would put a soldier or somebody alongside the road, and then when a truck or any cargo came by, then they would, whoever was on that mission would shoot the driver of the truck and usually wreck it. And I was riding in the back of this duck, and I was, as usual, if I was off the beach, I usually carried I always carried sidearms, but I'd carry a little 30-man rifle, and I was riding in the duck. I was looking backward,
Right.
and we were going down the road, and as we came by, and I wasn't particularly looking at this, but in a active battle situation, you kind of keep your eyes open. And this German soldier stood up and was about, what he was supposed to do is shoot the driver.
Right.
And I was sitting there with this gun, so I killed him. And the appearance, his look on his face was something, because it wasn't anything that he had anticipated, didn't even, and that, I guess, is the only time I could think of that I had actual one-to-one experience like that. But that guy stayed with me for a long time. And the other incident on that road, going up where we went, the breakthrough going inland was at St. Lo, and so a lot of our traffic was going up in that direction and crossing over. There's a low range of mountains right there, and I was just really kind of going on a lark, but I had read information in the newspaper that there were some of the soldiers were providing convenience stations for the truck drivers. and that they were backing up on traffic. And I don't know why, but I just kind of wondered. I had 2 crews that's exactly what they would do. So I rode up probably 20 miles, and they had set up in one of these German gun bunkers a whorehouse.
Mhm.
And St. Lo, I don't know if you're acquainted with that, that was famous for its prostitutes. And they came out when the Americans took St. Lo, a lot of the prostitutes went west instead of east. I suppose the pay was better. But here was one of my boat crews saw an opportunity. Here's the product, looking for a place to stay, and they had the quarters for them to stay in,
Right.
and there was a hell of a good market. So
Let's hope.
they were making out big time. Now, what would be my appropriate response?
So let me ask you this. How big of a cut did you ask for?
Oh, yay.
Well, you have to reward people that have an entrepreneurial orientation.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Any advice you'd like to give to the future generations?
Don't have war. Don't have war.
Well, I guess I'm satisfied that I was able to participate fully in that activity, but I would not want anybody else to. And my grandchildren always wanted to, they would, Grandpa, tell us about the war, and I couldn't do it. And I wouldn't do it. I mean, I didn't want to, you can't describe some of this stuff.
Right.
And you're in a system, you're doing what, I wasn't had any feeling about war or anything like that. I just went along with it, and I played by the rules. And I figure when the people that are running the country decide that they want to send you out and give you a gun to go shoot somebody, you probably should do it. But I think it marks young minds a lot deeper than you might realize.
Mhm. What was your feelings towards the enemy?
Well, I never, aside from taking them prisoner of war and as I said, shooting one, they were just on the other side, that's all.
Right.
I never placed any value judgments on why the population in Germany didn't behave differently or why they would support something like that. That wasn't, you knew that it was a big fight and that you were of an age and physically people wanted you to participate in it.
Did you have the feeling that you guys were going to win? Period. Like,
Oh, you never
no option.
thought about anything other than that. You never even, you just assumed that was good. The outcomes were such, and
Right. Alrighty, very good. Well, we thank you for your service. We thank you for the interview and your time.
And he
Thank
grew
you.
up as a German family.